I've created 7 categories to find the best plays for week 2 fantasy football. They're boom bust, best matchup, must sit, the top sleeper of the week, the top rookie, week winner, and the Hail Mary play of the week. We'll identify a player for each category to help you make those critical lineup decisions. Let's start with the boom bust player for week 2. This is a player with huge upside, but a low floor. Think high risk, high reward, but I'm rolling the dice with the hopes that he explodes. That's going to be Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman got off to a good start in week 1. He caught 5 of 8 targets, 52 yards, and a touchdown. That resulted in 16.2 fantasy points. He was the wide receiver 18 on the week. But why I'm so ready to call out an incoming boom week for Cedric Tillman already is because this is not an out-of-nowhere performance. Last season, after the Browns traded away Amari Cooper to the Bills, Cedric Tillman played in 4 games before a concussion ended his season. And in those 4 games, he averaged 18.6 fantasy points. He only scored fewer than 18 points just one time. He had a 22% target share over that stretch. He was looking like the wide receiver 1 in that offense and on the verge of becoming a must-start wide receiver in fantasy football. Now he's got a matchup against the Ravens in week 2, a team that he torched for 7 catches, 99 yards, and 2 touchdowns in week 8 of last season. And that was enough to finish as the wide receiver 3 in that week. The Browns trust Joe Flacco to drop back 40-plus times a game, so there should be plenty of opportunities for Cedric Tillman to make plays, even in the face of target competition like Jerry Jeudy, Harold Fannin, and David Njoku. And the Browns should be trailing in this game. They were going to be playing from behind, so even more reason to think that Joe Flacco is going to drop back and throw 40, maybe even 50 times in this game. I am ranking Cedric Tillman as my wide receiver 33 this week, ahead of Travis Hunter, ahead of Jerry Jeudy, ahead of Keon Coleman, and ahead of Tyreek Hill. I think you can also consider some other boom bust candidates this week, like Breece Hall against the Bills, Travis Etienne. Could he do it again? Could he do it again against the Bengals? Calvin Ridley against the Rams, Trevion Henderson going against the Dolphins, and then Ricky Pearsall against the Saints. Let's move on to the best matchup for week 2. Plain and simple. This guy has the nuts matchup. Start him if you got him. That's going to be James Conner going against the Panthers. James Conner was underwhelming in week 1. I'll give you that. He had just 44 total yards, and he was the RB16 in fantasy football. He also ceded some work to Trey Benson, who carried the ball 8 times, and he outgained James Conner by 30 yards. But James Conner still played 63% of the snaps, and he had 4 targets to Trey Benson's 1. And now he gets a matchup with a Panthers defense that routinely got torched on the ground in 2024. And then they picked up right where they left off in week 1, allowing Travis Etienne to run for 143 yards. And I'm sure there are fantasy managers who remember week 16 semifinals week last year when James Conner tore up the Panthers run defense for 117 yards on the ground, 49 in the receiving game, plus a touchdown and 26.6 fantasy points to finish semifinals week as the RB6. So this matchup is very ripe for another big outcome, big outing from James Conner. The Cardinals are at home and will likely be out to a lead. They'll be leaning on James Conner to grind out clock in the second half, and he'll be racking up yards and fantasy points along the way. Start him if you got him. I think some other really good matchups this week: Javonte Williams against the Giants, Justin Fields against the Bills, and Drake May going against the Dolphins. Could he do his best Daniel Jones impression and absolutely tear up that Dolphins defense like we saw Jones do in week 1? I think he could. Let's get on to the must sit. This is a player with a terrible matchup and needs to be on your bench if you have other options. And for me this week, this is going to be Michael Pittman going against the Broncos. It was a great week 1 for Michael Pittman. I'll give you that. He and the Colts had the privilege of playing the Dolphins. And Pittman, he took full advantage. He caught 6 of 8 targets for 80 yards and a touchdown. He finished wide receiver 8 on the week with 20 PPR points. But I am here to tell you not to get caught chasing those points, because I know you didn't start him last week. This matchup gets much tougher in week 2 against the Broncos. Last year, Denver gave up the 5th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers. And then in week 1, they harassed Cam Ward and completely shut down the Titans' passing game. In fact, the Titans didn't have a single player reach 30 receiving yards in that game. Tony Pollard led the way at 29. Patrick Surtain completely shut down Calvin Ridley, holding him to just 27 yards on 8 targets. I know Daniel Jones and company, they looked good in week 1, but this is going to be a whole different world against the Broncos. And let's be honest, it's still Daniel Jones. He's going to be affected by the Denver defense, and Michael Pittman is likely to see more Patrick Surtain than any other Colts wide receiver. So don't be chasing that week 1 performance. If you don't need him in your lineup, keep him on your bench. For this one, I'm also sitting Isaiah Pacheco against the Eagles, Nick Chubb against the Buccaneers, Keon Coleman against the Jets, and Aaron Rodgers against the Seahawks. With Coleman, he's probably going to see a lot of Sauce Gardner. Aaron Rodgers against the Seahawks. Seahawks are a really underrated defense right now. I just don't believe we're going to get a repeat performance from what Aaron Rodgers did last week. I don't think we're going to get that in back-to-back weeks. I don't believe. Moving on to the sleeper of the week. This is the player flying under the radar. Not many people are starting him, but the stars are aligned for him to be a good play this week. And for me, that's going to be Dylan Sampson going on the road against the Ravens. It was really interesting to see how that Browns backfield played out in week 1. Jerome Ford led the way with 54% of the snaps, but it was rookie Dylan Sampson who got the most touches. Sampson doubled Jerome Ford's carries 12-6, and he had an incredible 8 targets, which actually tied Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman for second on the team. He caught all 8 of those targets for 64 yards. It's amazing that he got that much work on just a 43% snap share. And he actually ran fewer routes, significantly fewer routes than Jerome Ford. The Browns made it a point to get the ball in his hands whenever he was out there. I think we'll see a snap share and route participation increase in week 2 for Dylan Sampson, which opens the door for even more touches. And that will come in a matchup against the Ravens, who just allowed James Cook to catch 5 passes for 58 yards in week 1. And the Browns let Joe Flacco drop back 45 times against the Bengals, something he did routinely when he was their starter at the end of 2023. And plus, they're going to be trailing in that game, so we're pretty much guaranteed another high-volume passing day for the Browns offense, which will benefit Dylan Sampson as the primary receiving back for this team. Now, I don't know what's going to happen with Quinshon Judkins. He's back at practice. I still don't think he's going to play this week. And even if he does, I actually still like Dylan Sampson as a sleeper. But Judkins, if he's out, obviously that'll mean, we're going to get another 12 plus carries from Dylan Sampson. So that'll be great news. But the receiving work is what is going to propel the fantasy production for Dylan Sampson. So he's going to get that whether Judkins is in the lineup or not. It's just the ceiling really opens up if Judkins is not playing. I imagine, no matter what, I do imagine that Dylan Sampson is at least going to be a little bit more efficient with his touches than he was in week 1, especially after the Ravens just gave up over 100 yards on the ground and 3 rushing touchdowns in week 1. So if we can get 50 plus rushing yards, another 5 or more receptions, that's an easy 10 plus points in PPR leagues in our lineup from Dylan Sampson. He's a really good sleeper this week. I also think some other sleepers you can consider in week 2, Michael Penix against the Vikings, Jaden Higgins against the Buccaneers, J.K. Dobbins against the Colts. We got Drake May against the Dolphins, Trey Benson. He could have a little bit of standalone value. The Cardinals could be blowing out the Panthers. The Panthers defense is terrible. They just got torched last week. Trey Benson is a guy who doesn't need a lot of touches to give you a lot of production because he's got that big playability. He can rip off a 70-yard run for a touchdown, and there, boom, right there, he paid off for you. So I think we can get some Trey Benson garbage time work in that game. And then we also got Harold Fannin against the Ravens. Keenan Allen, he still got it. He still got it against the Raiders. And if you want more sleepers, I do a sleepers show live right here on the Yards Per Fantasy YouTube channel every Saturday night with my co-host Sam. We give you 6 sleepers who you can start, plus a bold prediction to cap off the show. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss that. Let's move on to the Rookie of the Week. This is a rookie I expect to outperform expectations in Week 2. That's Omarion Hampton going against the Raiders. I talked about Omarion Hampton as one of the top trade targets for Week 2 in a video that I posted earlier this week. Check that out if you haven't already. I covered 10 buys, 3 sells for Week 2. Go check that video out. But I chose Omarion Hampton as a buy low because I was hearing so much negativity after his disappointing first game against the Chiefs. And I get it. I get it. It wasn't great. He ran 15 times, 48 yards, averaged just 3.2 yards per carry. And he caught just 2 passes, 13 yards, finished with fewer than 10 fantasy points. I get it. I get it. But there was so much good to take away from that game. The role was there. He played 80.6% of the snaps. He ran a route on 53.7% of Justin Herbert's dropbacks. He accounted for 89.5% of the backfield touches. That's elite usage. It really wasn't that surprising that he struggled to get going against a strong Chiefs run defense, one that gave up the second fewest fantasy points per game to running backs just a year ago. This is a good running back. Omarion Hampton's a good running back. He was a guy that I loved coming out of North Carolina. He was highly productive in college with an all-purpose skill set. He reminded me a lot of Josh Jacobs, actually. And the Chargers offense looked really good in Week 1. That might be an elite offense in 2025. And we want running backs in good offenses, especially running backs who are going to get full-blown bell cow usage like Omarion Hampton did in Week 1. Now Omarion Hampton gets a pretty favorable matchup against the Raiders in Week 2. Now, I know they did pretty well against the Patriots run game in Week 1, but the Chargers, especially the offensive line, that's a whole different animal than the Patriots. It's certainly possible the Chargers get out to a lead in this game, really lean on the run game, which could mean 20-plus touches for Omarion Hampton. I expect a much better performance from him. This could be his breakout week. Other rookies that I like this week, and I think this one's a little bit of a sleeper, Jaden Higgins against the Buccaneers. I think he'll break out at some point. This could be the game where that happens. Tetaroa McMillan, 26% target share in his NFL debut. Nobody else catching passes in that offense. He's due for a breakout. And then Harold Fannin, we saw what he did in his debut. Love the matchup against the Ravens. Let's move on to the week winner. This is the guy who is going to absolutely smash this week. He's going to put your team on his back and lead you to a victory all by himself. And that's Brian Thomas Jr. going on the road against the Bengals. Brian Thomas Jr., he was pretty quiet in Week 1. He did score a rushing touchdown, but otherwise he was held to just 1 catch for 11 yards. But still, he had a very healthy 24% target share. There were just some misconnections between he and Trevor Lawrence. It's very possible that the team puts an emphasis on getting the ball to Brian Thomas Jr. in Week 2. After all, Liam Cohen, he seemed pretty frustrated with the offense's inability to get the ball in Brian Thomas Jr.'s hands after that Week 1 game. So that could set up a blow-up spot for Brian Thomas. With a road game upcoming against the Bengals, the Jaguars could find themselves working from behind or even in a shootout. And that means we're probably going to get more passing volume, more downfield shots for guys like Brian Thomas Jr. We certainly know he's capable of big weeks. He scored as a top 12 wide receiver 6 times as a rookie. He was third among wide receivers in explosive plays and top 5 in receiving touchdowns. I think all the stars are aligning for Brian Thomas Jr. to have a 25-plus point performance and be the reason that you win your matchups in week 2. Other guys who I think could have that big blow-up game could be week winners this week. Travis Etienne, I think he could do it back-to-back weeks going against the Bengals. Drake London against the Vikings. He's fine with that shoulder injury. He could blow up in that spot. And Breece Hall. Breece Hall could blow up against the Bills. We saw what Derrick Henry just did to that defense. And we saw how good the Jets offense looked in week 1. Put those two things together, we could get a blow-up game from Breece Hall. Let's cap things off with the Hail Mary play of week 2. This is a player who is rostered in less than 5% of Yahoo leagues, but can be started if you need that desperation play. And for me this week, that is going to be Elic Ayomanor of the Titans going against the Rams. Now, on the surface, Elic Ayomanor had a quiet NFL debut. However, if we dig a little bit deeper, we'll see that he's actually looking like he's going to be a major piece of that Titans offense. He had an 82% route participation rate in week 1. He had an impressive 28% target share. He was top 12 among all NFL wide receivers in first read target share, top 5 in air yards, top 12 in air yard share. He was number 1 in unrealized air yards, meaning he was being targeted down the field. They just didn't connect on those passes. This is a good wide receiver, though. I liked him coming out of Stanford last year, or this year, I should say. I thought he'd be a second-round pick, but he slipped into day 3. But he's got good size. He's athletic. He plays physical. I actually comped him to a faster, more explosive Jawan Jennings. And he looked good in training camp and preseason as well. It was named as a starter by the coaches going into week 1. And now he gets the Rams in week 2. They're not exactly a cakewalk, but they're certainly not the toughest matchup in the world either. It certainly will be a much easier time than last week going against the Denver defense. Cam Ward should have a little bit more time to throw. They'll have better success connecting on some of those downfield plays. Elic Ayomanor is an interesting dart throw if you need a desperation flex play. He's rostered in just 5% of Yahoo leagues with the upside to score as a top 36 wide receiver. Other Hail Mary plays I'm looking at this week, you could consider Joe Flacco against the Ravens. We think they're going to throw the ball a ton in that game. Kenneth Gainwell against the Seahawks. Trey Tucker against the Chargers. Malik Washington against the Patriots. Noah Fant against the Jaguars. Olamide Zaccheaus against the Lions. Diami Brown against the Bengals. And Ray McLeod against the Vikings. If you need a dart throw, you need a desperation play, these are the guys to look to this week. Like I said, they're only rostered in 5% or less of Yahoo leagues. But that's it. Those are our 7 categories. We mentioned almost 30 players in this video. I hope something from this video will help you get that W in week 2. But don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel. I'll be putting out content like this all season long. And if you want more from me, you can find my rankings, articles, tools, resources, everything you need at yardsperfantasy.com.